main concerns, Jared. The first is that for any American who has money in a U.S. bank account, the stock market, bonds, anywhere in the U.S. dollars, your assets could see a massive collapse in value. But my second concern is perhaps bigger than that and will have dire consequences for every American. You see, as I said, our government is broke. As a result, they're going to take very desperate and even radical measures that might seem unconstitutional in order to save our financial system. In short, Jared, I believe the government could soon enact what I call financial martial law.
Martial law, you mean like using force?
They will try anything they can think of, and I'm sure they'll become creative if they need to be.
It just seems crazy. I mean, how could the government get away with that?
Most people only know about ordinary martial law, which usually happens after a natural disaster or some kind of riot. For example, after Hurricane Katrina, the government sent in the military and National Guard to certain neighborhoods to keep the peace. And as most people know, when martial law goes into effect, all the conventional rules of liberty go out the window. The government sets curfews, decides who's allowed in certain areas, that type of thing. And yes, they use force. Well, financial martial law is a bit different, but it's a heck of a lot scarier. They can literally come in and force you to invest in certain things, because if nobody wants government bonds anymore, and that's going to come, they'll say, well, if you have a retirement fund, you will buy government bonds. Martial law means force. When financial martial law goes into effect, all the financial rules you know about will go out the window. Everything you've earned, saved, invested in, it's all fair game for the U.S. government to seize. You think your money is yours and the government can't touch it? Not anymore. The government is going to embark on a money grab, the likes of which we haven't seen in 50 years.
I don't understand. I mean, doesn't something like that completely violate the U.S. Constitution?
Jared, if we see a full-blown currency crisis in this country, we will continue to see significant attacks on the Constitution and your liberties. Remember, the U.S. government will use any means necessary to protect and save the financial system. What I call financial martial law is what happens when the government finds itself in a desperate situation, very much like we're in right now, and decides to radically change the financial rules in order to keep the peace. But I haven't even told you the worst part. Every single time the U.S. government has used financial martial law in the past, it's resulted in huge losses of wealth for individuals like you and me.
But I've already paid my taxes, right? I mean, how can the government just walk up and start grabbing money out of my private account?
To the authoritarians, America's security and future is more important than any single individual, Jared. I've had members of the Fed tell me this personally. They've told me they acknowledge that radical Fed measures often hurt individuals, especially seniors and retirees, but it's just the price we have to pay for the greater good. In a crisis situation, the government will put their hands on your bank account, stock market account, your retirement account, your pension, you name it. Any place you have an asset priced in U.S. dollars, you could ultimately kiss up 80% of it goodbye.
But that seems like a pretty big leap from where we are today.
It's coming, Jared. They'll change the laws on what we can do with your money, how much you can access, and where you can spend it. They might even change the money itself. The people will eventually have to wake up and find out what's going on. When I show you what's being proposed, I think you'll be pretty surprised. American history has shown us many times that when the government needs to save itself, it won't hesitate to steal your money.
So you're saying the government has done this type of thing before, right here in America?
Several times. For example, what if I told you every U.S. dollar you have in the bank right now could one day be worth just a single penny? Look it up in the history books, Jared. In the earliest years of our country, there was a Continental Congress who was as desperate for money as our current government is today. But then there was no Federal Reserve, so they created something called Continentals, bills of credit, or Continentals for short. In essence, they printed money out of thin air. They issued more than $240 million worth of Continentals and then forced it on the people.
What do you mean by force?
Anyone who refused to accept America's new Continental funny money faced stiff penalties. In Virginia, for example, refusing to accept the new currency for an existing debt amounted to a cancellation of that debt. And you can probably guess what happened. The money was so inflated The exchange rate fell from 1 continental per silver dollar to 40 to 1 and then 75 to 1 in little more than a year. Ultimately, continentals fell 99% in value in just a few years, and the federal government reneged on their promise to pay continentals with precious metals. So anyone left holding this worthless currency was entitled to receive just a penny for every dollar, a near total destruction of wealth.
All right, but wait, Dr. Paul, that was a long, long time ago. I mean, before our current government even existed. I mean, they wouldn't do something like that now, would they?
No, it happened over and over in 1971, 1933. It even happened with one of the most trusted U.S. presidents in history. President Lincoln created a system whereby the government changed the rules of finance. It's a sad story, actually. They created a new type of paper money known as greenbacks, specifically to pay soldiers and government debt. Meanwhile, the government itself didn't touch greenbacks, but they demanded taxes to be paid in silver and gold coins.
So a double standard.
Double standard for sure. And the new money plummeted in value, dropping 66% over several years. It took U.S. soldiers 15 years before they could ultimately redeem their greenbacks for an equivalent value of gold.
Yeah, but still, again, that was during the Civil War, right? So before America was the most powerful country in the world.
Yes, it was, but I hope you're starting to see a pattern here, Jared. Broke and desperate governments do truly desperate things. For example, what if I told you the government might put out a recall on your money, forcing you to turn it into federal banking facilities in exchange for something less valuable?
I don't know, that sounds something like you would see in China or Russia, but not here.
Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt did exactly that when he gave Americans just 1 month to turn in all their gold bullion, common gold coins, and gold certificates to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System.
Is that what actually happened?
Look it up in the history books, Jared. 1933. Anyone who failed to comply faced penalties, including forfeiture, fines, and imprisonment. And here's the worst part. Once everyone turned in all their gold, Roosevelt instantly made the dollars they received less valuable. With the stroke of a pen, many Americans lost 41% of their savings overnight. People don't believe anything like this could happen today, but I'm telling you, it's coming. The U.S. government will use financial martial law.
So was there anything that people could have done back then to protect themselves?
For most people, no. It was a disaster, but some did, sure. There's a famous story of a lawyer named Harold Bareford. For instance, he found a legal way to hold on to and accumulate even more gold during the FDR era. His holdings reportedly sold years later for something like 87 times his money.
Okay, so the government destroyed the currency in the 1700s, the 1800s, and then again in the early 1900s. And at each turn, they implemented all kinds of schemes and laws to essentially steal money from regular citizens like you and me. But again, could it really happen?
Not only will it happen again, but we're still feeling the effects of the last time it happened with Nixon. Remember, in 1971, when countries around the world lost faith in the dollar, President Nixon changed the rules overnight. He closed the gold window and decreed that dollars were no longer redeemable for gold.
Well, fine, but that was 45 years ago.
The damage is still being felt. You see, ending the tide to precious metals allowed the government to expand the money supply. And as I've said many times in my career in the House of Representatives, you can't create prosperity by printing money out of thin air. Ever since Nixon changed the rules, the value of the U.S. dollar has plummeted, Jared. Not to mention, it ushered in one of the worst decades in financial history. Inflation soared by more than 100%. Unemployment went above 10%. Stocks fell 40% in a single 18-month period. And the Standard & Poor's 500 fell as much as 45% in the first part of the decade. And interest rates ultimately soared to nearly 20%, which made it very difficult for people to buy new houses or cars.
Okay, but what could the government realistically do next? What would financial martial law look like in this day and age?
The next step is very simple. They're going to take control of U.S. retirement accounts. It could be one of the biggest encroachments in our nation's history, but I think the chances are great. that the U.S. government will soon target ordinary Americans' retirement accounts and essentially siphon out the money.
But how can they do that? That's got to be illegal.
Because they act outside the law. Somebody says, would that be unconstitutional? Obviously, well, the monetary system is unconstitutional. They never repaired the part of the Constitution where the founders were emphatic. Only gold and silver can be legal tender. They just totally ignore it. And every time a case like that has gone to the courts, the court always rules on the side of government.
It just seems crazy. I mean, how could the government get away with that?
Jared, today there's about $23 trillion in U.S. retirement accounts. Suppose the government mandates that all citizens put 1/3 of these accounts into special issue U.S. Treasury securities. Well, lo and behold, that's an instant $7 trillion for the government.
There's no way. I mean, you're saying the government can force me to buy worthless Treasury bonds?
It's as legal as taxing you. You have to understand that $23 trillion just sitting around in retirement accounts is too much money for a desperate and broke government to ignore. And let me tell you something, if you don't think this can happen right here in America, wake up. It's already being discussed. In 2008, Democrats talked about seizing private retirement accounts and converting them to accounts managed by Social Security. In 2013, the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau considered helping Americans manage their retirement accounts. And even Forbes.com contributor William Tucker suggested this could lead to forcing Americans to stock their retirement accounts with low-return government bonds. Not to mention, Obama recently introduced his MyRA program, which amounts to an IRA that invests directly in government bonds any reasonable investor on the open market wouldn't touch. I worked in Washington for over 30 years, Jared. Believe me, I know what these people are capable of, and I know how they think.
I mean, it just seems incredible that the government would or could invade people's retirement accounts.
Look it up in the history books. You don't have to go back very far. The U.S. Treasury Department has already done it 3 separate times. They raided government employee pension funds in 2011, 2012, and 2013 to plug federal spending deficits. Plus, this is already happening around the globe. In 2013, Poland sought to reduce public debt by nationalizing half of all money in private pensions. Similar things have happened in Argentina, Ireland, France, Russia, Belgium, Hungary, Cyprus, and Bolivia. You can't trust the government, Jared. Not with your money and your family's future. They won't save you and they can't help you. Confiscation of your retirement accounts is coming soon, I promise. If you ignore this possibility, you could lose everything you've saved if you're forced to buy worthless U.S. government bonds.
What else do you think will happen in the U.S. If the government enforces this financial martial law?
I think we'll see huge tax increases and even a wealth tax, but it won't just be for the wealthy.
So what do you mean?
A wealth tax is basically a tax on everything you own. It's like property taxes, but instead of taxing just the value of your home each year, a wealth tax levies fees on everything you own, year after year after year.
Now, how could the government possibly get away with that?
The government makes the rules, Jared, not you or me. In a crisis situation like the one that's unfolding right now, they'll get away with just about anything. In many parts of the world, like France and India, similar wealth taxes already exist.
And how does wealth tax work?
Take India, for example. In India, the government tallies up everything you own, stocks, bonds, real estate, retirement accounts, you name it. Then you're forced to pay 1% tax for every penny of net worth over $48,000. And yes, you pay that every single year.
And the people actually agree to this?
They don't have a choice. Evading this tax is a criminal offense. You go to jail for 7 years for underreporting your wealth in India. They also impose a penalty of up to 500% on any unreported amount.
Oh, that's crazy.
Well, get used to it because it's coming here too. There's simply no other way for our broke federal government to pay the $19 trillion in debt we owe today. And there's no other possible way to close out the $200 trillion fiscal gap, which is the obligations we've already promised in the future. Absolutely, positively, no way possible.
So again, with financial martial law, what else could happen?
Well, here's something else. I think most Americans are going to be rudely shocked in the coming months. And that's retroactive taxes.
What are retroactive taxes?
It's something that a lot of broke states are already trying right now. They're basically saying, you thought your taxes were paid for last year? Nope. Think again. We just passed a new law. Turns out you owe us up to an additional 3% on your income earned. Send us a check or else.
And you say that this is already happening?
Most recently in California, these kinds of retroactive tax increases have also been passed in Washington, Michigan, and Connecticut to help fund budget shortfalls. They say it's only temporary, of course, but we all know how that works. In government, temporary solutions have a nasty habit of becoming permanent.
Dr. Paul, has it really come to this? I mean, when did it become okay to confiscate money from ordinary, hardworking Americans to fund out-of-control government spending? And when did it become okay to retroactively increase taxes or mess around with our retirement accounts? Isn't there anything that can stop the government from taking this idea of financial martial law any further than it's already gone?
I wish I could say yes, but no. The politics of our economy prevents them from making the right decisions. And that's why I'm here issuing this warning today. You absolutely must learn how to protect yourself, whether you've got $10,000 or $10 million in the bank. It won't matter. The government's coming for you and your money. And once the laws are in place, good luck.
So what else should I be worried about?
I think negative interest rates are on the way. That means instead of earning interest on money you have in the bank, you would have to pay the bank to hold your money for you. Sounds crazy maybe, but this is all a consequence of what the Fed has been doing over the past decade, when trillions and trillions of artificial new dollars made their way into the economy. So I recommend you find a safe place you can keep money and still earn a decent return. Keep in mind, other governments around the globe have already tried to print money in massive quantities to pay their debt. In just the past 100 years, we've seen this scenario play out in Germany, Russia, Austria, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Poland, Ukraine, Japan, and China, and of course, Zimbabwe. And guess what? In every single case, printing and borrowing money has always led to a currency crisis. The United States won't be an exception. We might be able to stave it off for a while and let this debt bubble get bigger and bigger. But it's going to pop at some point, Jared. Mark my words.
So let me ask you something. Is there any chance that none of this stuff will come to pass?
No, no chance. The United States is not immune to the basic laws of economics and finance. No country in the history of mankind has ever managed to avoid the laws of economics.